want to thank you all for joining us tonight and welcome you to FVCC's second annual Mansfield Lecture. I'm Jane Karras, president of the college, and we're so pleased to have you all here because this is a community college. And without all of you, we wouldn't have this great college that we have here and the fabulous programs that we have and a way to educate and train students and individuals who live here. But tonight is our second annual Mansfield Lecture, and it's been inspired by the life and legacy of Montana's Michael Joseph Mansfield, who served as a U.S. representative from 1943 to 1953, and as a U.S. senator from 1953 to 1977. FVCC's annual Mansfield Lecture seeks to promote a spirit of inclusivity and collaboration. During his many years at the Capitol and afterward as the U.S. ambassador to Japan from 1977 to 1989, Mansfield's thoughtful statesmanship, political finesse, and humble personality gained him wide respect from Republicans and Democrats alike. The Mansfield Lecture takes place annually in honor of the life of Mike Mansfield, who lived from 1903 to 2001, and is made possible by a gift to the FVCC Foundation. Now it is my honor to introduce tonight's speaker. In 2014, U.S. President Barack Obama nominated Max Baucus to be Ambassador of the United States of America to the People's Republic of China. He served as ambassador from February 21, 2014 until January 19, 2017. Ambassador Baucus formerly served as the senior United States Senator from Montana. He served in the U.S. Senate from 1978 to 2014 and was Montana's longest-serving U.S. Senator, as well as the third longest with tenure among those serving in the U.S. Senate. While in the Senate, Ambassador Baucus was chairman and ranking member of the powerful Senate Committee on Finance. While chairman, he was the chief architect of the Affordable Health Care Act, the ACA, which was signed by President Obama into law March 23rd of 2009. Ambassador Baucus has extensive experience in international trade. As chairman of the Senate Committee on Finance, he led the passage and enactment of the free trade agreements with 11 countries. He also was deeply involved in orchestrating the congressional approval of permanent normal trade relations with China in 2000 and in facilitating China's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001. During his service in the United States Senate, Ambassador Baucus served on and chaired numerous committees. And there were very many, but I know you want to hear from Ambassador Baucus, so I'm not going to share all of those with you. But before his election to the U.S. Senate, Ambassador Baucus represented Montana in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1975 to 1978, where as a young congressman, he worked with then Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield. Prior to serving in Congress, Ambassador Baucus represented Missoula in the Montana House of Representatives from 1973 to 1974. Ambassador Baucus currently lives in Bozeman, Montana, where he and his wife, Melody Haynes, have formed a consulting firm, Baucus Group, LLC. Ambassador Baucus provides consulting services to American and Chinese businesses and serves on the board of directors of Ingram Micro and the board of advisors to Alibaba Group. He additionally serves on the external advisory board to the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. Ambassador Baucus earned both a bachelor's in law degree from Stanford University and recently founded the Baucus Institute at the University of Montana School of Law. The Institute focuses on inspiring students to public service with an emphasis on trade, China, healthcare, environmental studies, and taxation. Ambassador Baucus has been a longtime friend of education and community colleges in particular. In 2011, the Association of Community College Trustees recognized him with the National Education Service Award. He has been a guest lecturer at FVCC and provided many opportunities for students to learn through hands-on experience about policy development. As he has stated, Max's roots are in Montana, as are his heart and soul. He always tried his best. His focus has been on what is best for Montana and for our nation. It is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Ambassador Max Baucus.
Thank you, Jane, very much. Thank you, Jane. I'm sure you agree with me that all of you are Jane Karras fans. She's amazing. I wish we had more like you, Jane. Not only in the Valley, but in the state and the country, you are just aces. And all the years I've known you, I don't know anybody I can think of as a person or as an educator who I admire more than you. You are just wonderful. I'm also, before I begin, if you'll let me reminisce a little bit, when I walked in here, I thought, oh my gosh, that reminds me. We had a religious summit here in this very room, about 10 years ago, something like that. It was great. I had several around the state, one Billings, and the other was, I think, Helen III here. Invited the United States Senate chaplain, Barry Black, to come and be the main speaker. And Chaplain Black's a great guy, his deep voice when he speaks. And he says a prayer, boy, you listen, it is something else. Well, he had a free day after he spoke here. And my chief of staff, my top guy, happened to be from Connecticut, not a Montanan, from Connecticut. And so his name was John Sullivan, said, Chaplain, I'll tell you what, during your free day, I'll take you for a hike in the park. Chaplain Black thought, that's great, that's what we'll do. So next morning, got up early, went to a local sporting goods store, and my guy, John Selb, got some bear spray. So they went out to the park, trailhead, I've forgotten really where they were hiking, and John pulled the bear spray out of his knapsack and started spraying Chaplain Black. Well, it didn't take long to figure out that's not what you're supposed to do with bear spray. And Chaplain Black's never let me forget that. Mel and I were in Washington just a few days ago to the funeral of Senator John McCain, and we were in the bus together, all of us going up to get a bus ride over to the National Cathedral, and who's sitting across the aisle but Chaplain Black? And he turned to Mel and said, last time I saw your husband, he goes, I tell the story. But it's a great story, and he's a great man. And I also say that part because of John McCain. And this was, as you all know, such a great American, what he's been through and so forth. A lot of people say that sometimes somebody is irreplaceable. I think John McCain is irreplaceable. There will be no one in the Senate like him. No one with his stature, with his honesty. He's just direct. His faith in America, his religion, his God, and the military code of honor. There is not an ounce of guile or deceit in his body. He says it like it was, as he saw it. He spoke truth to power, and he had the ability to do so. As an admiral's son, a grandson of an admiral, Annapolis, Hanoi, Hilton, for 5 years, amazing man, just a totally amazing man. Now, you wouldn't always agree with him, and sometimes he was a little quick with the trigger, and he'd blow up, get angry, lose his temper. But he did it for the right reasons. It was never because he is personally upset with you. It's because he didn't agree with you on policy. And twice he blew up at me, just lost it. And the first time it happened, I just thought, my gosh, what did I do wrong? What's all this about? And then afterwards he came up and he apologized. Max, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean that, and so on and so forth. But I mentioned that in part, John McCain in part, because of what's happening in Washington today, the partisanship. John McCain was totally bipartisan. He did not get involved in partisan issues. He worked on what he thought was right. He joined me and another senator to plug a loophole in the tax code. A lot of people were convicted of crimes or had to pay a civil fine, deducted their fines from their income tax. That's illegal. But John introduced a bill, me and a couple others say, okay, we're going to plug that loophole, John just wanted to do what was right. That was John McCain. And so I here today, it's such a short time after his funeral, and because it's partly what's happening in Washington, D.C., and because we need more bipartisanship, I felt the right thing to do would be to honor John McCain. I put this up here because I think it's quintessential John, and I'll just read it. The way you have bipartisan negotiations, you sit down across the table, as we did with Ted Kennedy, as I've done with many other members, and you say, okay, here's what I want, here's what you want. We'll adhere to your principles, but we'll make concessions. He was just straight. It was all issues. It was not personal. That was John McCain. This one's sort of, I think, especially poignant. I put this up because, as you can tell by looking at it, this is the moment we decided to vote against repeal of the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. The floor of the Senate, there he is right there. He's about ready to say no. He cast the deciding vote. You can see over to the left is the majority leader, Mitch McConnell. Not too happy. But John did what he thought was right. That vote actually occurred after he spoke with two other senators who were kind of the fence. It was Lisa Murkowski from Alaska and Susan Collins from Maine. And John just thought, after talking to them, I'm just going to do what I think is right here. Now, maybe in part because his health was not the best, and John just cared a lot about health and people's health. I suspect that might have something to do with it, but it meant a lot to me. Jane, in her introductory remarks, mentioned as, a lot to do with the passage of the Affordable Care Act. In fact, our committee was the lead committee. So I was very proud of John when he cast that vote. Okay, Mike Mansfield. When I thought about speaking today, I thought, well, I'll pair John McCain with Mike Mansfield. They're very similar, but very different. They're very similar because they're both patriots. They cared about America. They cared about America's place in the world. The beacon on the hill, American involvement in the world, American values, American principles. John clearly did as a military officer and as a member of Congress in the Armed Services Committee, pushing a stronger military budget. Mike certainly did with his very, very erudite and effective work in foreign policy, especially with respect to Asia and China and Japan. But for both of them, it's America first in the best sense of the term. And for both of them, it was totally nonpartisan. You work with whom you have to work with to be most effective, to get something positive done. So the whole, in fact, is greater than the sum of the parts. They both are that way. Now, totally different. John McCain, kind of a hothead, say what he thought. There is nobody more patient than Mike Mansfield, or a man of few words. Cerebral, very carefully knew who he had to work with in lots of issues. Worked with President Nixon, helped bring an end to the war in Vietnam. He worked with other senators to help pass the Civil Rights Act. But Mike was what you want in a quintessential public servant. And a lot of people lament, gee, where are those folks now? We don't have as many anymore. And it's true, but in my judgment, I think some of the folks there can stand up a little more than they are. But to be fair about it, back then, money didn't speak as much. Today, campaign contributions, unfortunately, I think have a huge adverse effect on what members of Congress do and don't do, because they're spending so much time raising money. I remember sitting down with Mike once. It's over in Helena, and I said, gee, good luck, Mike, in this next race of yours. And boy, you probably have to raise a lot of money. He said, oh, no. He said, I don't have to, my campaign's going to cost, he said, about $36,000. And I'm going to turn half of it back. It's just money that came to me. I turned half of that back. And gee, I thought, that's amazing. When I first ran for Congress, it was 1976 for the Senate, and 74 for Congress. I raised and spent, well, first for the Senate in 78, I raised and spent $800,000. Every 2 years it doubled, 1.6, 3.2, and so forth. It's nuts. And I'm just the standard case here. I mean, that's the case for most other members of Congress. I'm not going to mention how much John Tester and Rosendale are going to spend together, but it's going to be an embarrassing, huge, tidy sum of money, which tends to make it difficult to work together and do what's right. I hate to say it that way, but I think that's part of it. Mike impressed me in so many ways. That is his bipartisanship. He once said to me after I got elected, he said, Max, don't forget, yeah, you're a Democrat, but you represent all of Montana, the whole state. And boy, I knew what he meant. He didn't have to say it because I knew that's the right thing to do anyway, but that was Mike. Another time he said to me, now, Max, don't forget, the other guy isn't always wrong, and you're not always right. Yes, sir. But just little reminders like that. You didn't have to say much, just a little bit here and there. It's just so powerful, the way you said it. So that's Mike. And I mentioned this other slide, show this other slide here because Mike, in 1968, wrote a speech, a lecture he gave at the University of Montana at the Mike Mansfield Foundation. When I read this thing, I read it about 5 years ago, I couldn't believe it. It was one of the most impressive, most well-written, perceptive articles on any subject written by any person I ever saw. It just blew me away. That was his stature. What was it? It was basically why we, America, should start opening our minds a little bit toward China. We should not be so reactive against China. Don't forget, 68, it's after the Vietnamese War. War was starting to wind down. It's contained China. All these countries circled China, contained China. All those heathens over there, those Chinese. And a little bit was after the McCarthy era. But about that same time, who lost China? Democrats are blamed for, quote, losing China after World War II, when the Kuomintang and the communists were duking it out and pushing Japan out of their country, and then they had to fight themselves, the nationalists and the communists, and of course the communists won, so the big cry was, who lost China? You Democrats, you were in charge there. That was FDR, you lost China. But Mike was courageous and knew that we have to, if we're going to be smart about this, can't stick our heads in the sand. We've got to be very clear-eyed, but also think how we best deal with China. Amazing article. I commend it to any of you who have any interest in our history at that time, 68. Even if you don't, it's worth reading. It's so instructive. It's helpful. But I say that because Mike had the bright idea that earlier Truman sent him to an international conference a long time ago. He had the bright idea, well, because China is so important, maybe I, Mike Mansfield, should try to see the top guy over there, not Mao Zedong, but the next guy, Zhou Enlai, and send an invitation through Prince Sihanouk, who was then head of Cambodia. And so he thought he'll send a note to Prince Sihanouk, and Sihanouk was a friend of Zhou Enlai. We'll then give it to Zhou Enlai, and the letter said, well, if you want me to come over and talk to you, you want to invite me, I'd like to come over. And so that's what happened. This went through. But it sat with Zhou Enlai for a long time. There was no response. And then later, and this time, Mike would brief LBJ, who was then president, about what's going on. He's going over there. And he'd also, after Nixon got elected in November of '68, he briefed Nixon what's going on. And he got LBJ's blessing, and Nixon said, yeah, fine, go ahead and do all that. That's good. Keep it up. Like you keep doing that. No problem. Well, lo and behold, it turned out slightly before this photograph was taken, there he is meeting in Marine with Zhou Enlai. President Nixon thought, well, he would send his own emissary over to Zhou Enlai. And he did, send Henry Kissinger over. Unbeknownst to Mike Mansfield, unbeknownst to anybody. Nixon didn't tell anybody what he was doing. And I know, as sure as I'm standing here, that Kissinger read that speech of Mike, or others read that speech of Mike, and they gave Kissinger and others ideas of what to do and how to approach China. And sure enough, they went over, and this is Mike, sure enough, he did not get any credit for doing this. When he met Joe later on, Joe said, gee, gosh, I got your invitation to come over and see me. I got Nixon's to come over and see me. And later, much later, what do I do? He's the president, so I guess I got to accept his, not yours. And Mike said that was the right thing to do because he is the president. Mike so wanted to do the right thing, always the right thing. And that's very poignant for me. Mel has mentioned to me, it's kind of a little asterisk footnote here. There's a lady, a Thai lady, her name is Sarin, who was sent by her father as kind of as ransom or money.
After World War II, kind of as a peace offering.
Peace offering, that's right. It's a peace offering, sent his daughter, a high official in Thailand, sent his daughter, Sarin, to be a stepdaughter to Zhou Enlai. I know this lady. Mel and I know this lady quite well. And she has all these stories, sitting there with Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, and when she's a little girl, watching all that's going on. But it's just one of those little things that they did back then is bigger officials give peace offerings to high officials. And it got so bad, then after the middle of the Cultural Revolution, it got so bad that Sarin's life was in danger. So Joe said, hey, Sarin, we can get you out of the country. You got to go. You're not going to last here. So got her married off to a British guy, moved to London, and that's how she lived, survived. But anyway, just a small little footnote. Okay, I put this up for two reasons. Mike was bipartisan. He worked with Nixon, he worked with Republicans, he worked with Everett Dirksen, who was then majority leader of the Senate, or minority at one time. Hugh Scott, he wanted to get things done. I also put this up because it kind of bothers me a little bit that there he is. He's not telling Mike secretly what he's doing. But that's fine. Okay, Nixon met with Zhou Enlai. Very important time, in, obviously, in American, Chinese, and even world history in the 70s. Okay, changing gears here. Now we'll get this other kind of slides. Yeah. This is interesting. This basically shows how the world's changed from just a couple hundred years ago, 1820, from the far left. You can see back then, the United States' share of world GDP was virtually zero. And back then, China's share of GDP was about 30%. India was about 15%. 1820, just think what the world was like back then. Then moving forward, we go to about 1950. Look what's happening. The United States is growing. It's aftermath of the Industrial Revolution. China's retreating. And then it's retreating basically because Chinese believe, and there's a lot of truth, that those 200 years, 1800s and 1900s, were their years of humiliation. 2 centuries of humiliation. They turned inward. China did during those 2 centuries, 1800s and 1900s. Put upon by the Brits, the Boxer Rebellion, put upon by the Japanese, invaded, put upon by lots of other countries who took advantage of China. They didn't know how to protect themselves. They didn't have their court, the Qing dynasty, just didn't know, it was corrupt, and other countries were able to take advantage of them. So they just went downhill. And they get to 73 and things started to change. That little dip there in 1973, and that's when China began to open up and reform. That's their then premier, Deng Xiaoping. Okay, we're gonna open up. We gotta get going here. This isn't going too well. So let's open up to the world. It did in 73, and that's why you see China starting to grow. And about that time, comparatively, the United States declined a little bit. This kind of shows the same thing. Global economy. You can see 1400, that's way on the left, top left, 1400. China, 30% of the world's economy. Of course, we didn't exist then. Then going down that green column, down the bottom, 2015, China is 17%, and the US, far right, bottom, same number, about 17%. So just things change over time. And a couple data points here. You see, in 1978, China opened up economically. That's the genius of Deng Xiaoping. And then later on, that line going up to the right, Shanghai stock market opened up for the first time since the Cultural Revolution, 1949. That gave them a little boost. And then China joined the World Trade Organization. That gave them a bigger boost. I find this chart fascinating. What's it say? If you look on the far left, see, it represents China's population. That is 20% of the world population is Chinese, 20%. And you'll see their economy is below the 20%, about 15% of the world's whole economy. Okay, but look at those other pie charts. See where it says concrete, 60%? China consumes 60%, more than half of the world's cement. More than half. Look at them all. Copper, same thing, about half of world's copper consumption. World is in China. Only 20% of the world's economy, yet about half of the world's copper consumption. Coal, same thing, about 50%. Half the world's coal is consumed in China. They also produce a lot of coal in China, I might add. And then you see the others, aluminum about the same, steel, about half the world's steel is consumed in China. And that's just all across the board there. They're voracious consumers of raw materials. Voracious. I kind of like this one. Is there one back earlier than that? Okay. I like this one. This represents China's use of cement over the past 3 years. That block represents the amount of cement that China has used in the last 3 years compared with the city of Chicago. What Chicago is consumed or built in that same period of time. Okay. I'm missing a slide here. There's another slide that says, it shows, and this is the point, China in the last 3 years has consumed more cement than the United States has in the whole previous century. 3 years more than 100 years, US. This is a little slightly esoteric, very simple though. Basically it says, it's the far right column, and China's red, the United States is blue. The main point being here, how much the Chinese economy affects the world economy compared with the US. So if the Chinese economy goes south big time, the world economy goes south big time. If the US economy goes south big time, almost big time, the world economy goes south almost as much, big time. Here it is, no. Here it is. Here's the coal chart. I mean, cement chart. Again, China in 3 years consumed more than the United States did in 100 years. Okay, Chinese care about education. They really care about education. Every Chinese family, they'll do anything to make sure their kid gets the very best education possible. Why is that? It's because China is so competitive. It's so competitive. To get ahead in the world, you've got to make sure you're really well educated. Kind of small sidebar here, when you walk the streets of China, Beijing, any place, you queue up, bus service or subway or something, everybody's pushing ahead of you, they're jostling up to get ahead of you, they're pushing you aside. When you first arrive, you think, gee, they're just being rude. That's awfully rude. No. They're just competitive. Their parents or grandparents went through the great leap forward or the Cultural Revolution. Millions died, starvation, and it's competitive. You got to compete, not only to get ahead, but to survive. Now that's slightly overstated, but not a lot. You can see the chart there. Chinese, that's the number of bachelor's degrees in science and education. Look at it, that red line just goes zip up through 2014. In the US, we're plugging along there, but we're not where China is. And just take the law of large numbers. After a while, if so many more have science and engineering degrees, after a while, things are going to start to happen. I like this chart for several reasons. This is helps explain China's role in climate change, in global warming. Basically, there is the United States blue down at the bottom, up, and the projection is up through the year 2030. You kind of go up, you see these different colors, and you can see China has kind of that purple color. It's larger than the United States. More greenhouse gas, or at least carbon dioxide gas emissions by the year 2030. And I think that's about right. India is rising, and frankly, I think this chart's a bit dated because India now is projected to have more greenhouse gases than China went down the road because India is burning so much more coal. Right? 80–90% of India's power production is based on coal. In China, about 60% is coal. And China's doing all it can to develop other energy sources, but this is where they are. I also mentioned this last chart because one of my most wonderful times when I served in China was when eventually Barack Obama and Xi Jinping agreed to address climate change. And it was hard getting that put together with teeth to it, with numbers to it. When I first arrived over there, I talked to them, to Xi Jinping and all the leadership, about we got to do something about climate change. This isn't working out too well here. It was like talking to a fence post. I got nowhere. But after a while, you just keep it up, keep talking. Others would come over, obviously, cabinet secretaries with the same message. President Obama, same message, and we just keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. And after a while, I saw a little glimmer in their eyes, the Chinese eyes. Why? I think they thought, gee, maybe we can get something out of this. And what could they get out of it? Well, one, our guy, President Xi, could be on the world stage with their guy. Yeah, that's a pretty big deal to be on the world stage with the President of the United States and sign this climate change accord. And in stature, Chinese could be the leader of the developing countries, and China and the U.S. could be the leader of the developed countries. So that's a pretty big deal. Second, here's what else they can get out of it. Hey, we can use this to push back on the troglodytes in our government, in our country, the non-reformers, the people who just don't want to reform, saying, hey, if we sign up to this, our country's got to reform a little bit here. The leadership is a little more progressive that way. They really are. They got to deal with lots of others, the bureaucracy and so forth. So that's another thing they could get out of it. One more thing, renewable energy. Hey, if we have to do this, let's be the leader in the world in renewable energy, solar, wind, and other forms of renewable energy, electric vehicles. And we'll subsidize the dickens out of all these industries so we can be the world leaders. And boy, China did with a vengeance. It's probably why a lot of our companies are going under, wind, solar, and so forth, because of what they did. This chart shows that China is the biggest investor in renewable energy. You can see China green on the right, and the bottom sentence, China's biggest financial commitment to renewables, over 100 billion, increased from 3 billion in just over 10 years. And they spent a lot of money developing renewable energy. Now, they're a big country. Still, most of their production, electric production, is from coal, some from nuclear power, oil, but they spend a lot on renewables because they do want to be a major leader in the world on renewables. Okay, so China takes the lead in wind. You can see way above the United States, over in the far left, China's far left column, we're next. They're going. Same thing in solar, China. Big time in solar. Subsidized preferential financing for their industries, but that's what they do. They're a socialistic form of government. They're authoritarian. They can just direct it. This is what it's going to be. Okay. R&D expenditures in China rising as much as they possibly can. They almost tripled their share of gross domestic product devoted to R&D over the last 20 years. But it still is below that of the US, but the trend line is very positive. They're a poor country. They don't have as much as we have, but they're sacrificing to do what they think we have to do for the long term. Similar chart. China has the highest capacity for renewable power production. It's this ocean. I forgot what CSP is. Geothermal, bio, solar, wind. Okay, this is, what is this? R&D, against R&D. US top line, and China is that gray line, sloping up very steeply up to get close to the United States in R&D spending. China's you all know about this, but it's just stunning. E-commerce, about 700 million e-commerce users in China. The United States, we're not quite there. That assumes e-commerce is good. I think if you're involved in e-commerce, you're quick, you're smart, you got those mobile phones. You're working pretty hard. And this is, huh?
Put your glasses on.
Oh, what does it say up top?
Early and later stage.
Oh yeah, this just shows they're investing too. It's not early, it is a capital, venture capital. It's early stage and late stage investors becoming more market oriented, not just government directed expenditures. Heavy robots. Asia leads the world in robotic usage. And take Asia, China is 50% of Asia use. Very heavy in robots. There's a lot of talk, oh, Chinese labor is cheap. Cheap wages over there. Well, it's true to some extent, but it's changing a lot. China knows if they're going to have the best technologies in the world, and I do think that is their goal, they've got to move to robotics and high-end, smart-level production as quickly as they possibly can. They'll find ways to take care of the people. They'll find ways. May not always be pretty, but they'll find a way to do it because that's a national goal. Moving on to another subject here, and this is China's international economic expansion. You've heard about the One Belt, One Road. They've renamed it. They call it the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative. The red's the overland. The blue is by sea. They're building ports all along the way. You've heard about a lot of them. And heavily financed, built by the Chinese. And if the local host government can't pay the loan back, then China just takes over the port. It's theirs. Huge foreign reserves China has, about close to $4 trillion in foreign exchange. They can spend where they want. And now, a lot of talk about this. I frankly, personally, that this is very smart idea of the president, Xi Jinping. It's visionary. It's a plan. It could reach fruition maybe in several years. Contrast that with the United States. We are so ad hoc. We're so reactive. Our governments come and go. Congressional elections every 2 years. We used to react. China, of course, has to react a little bit tactically, but not strategically. They think they've got plans. They think that they're going to come back. I mentioned that 200 years of barbarianism a little while ago. Chinese think, okay, a lot of Chinese think this, and I say it's kind of the majority view. We Chinese were the center of the universe for thousands of years. The Middle Kingdom, everybody came and kowtowed to the emperor, Middle Kingdom. Then things kind of went haywire about 1800. When you might recall, there's this famous, I don't know his name. They became inward, and other countries began to subject China to all kinds of external pressures. And China now thinks, okay, that 200 years is over. They got bounce in their step, the wind's at their back, and our time has come. The last 200 years is just an aberration of thousands of years of history. You know, we made a mistake for 200 years, but we're back. And part of this is their vision of getting back, developing routes to Asia, East Asia, Central Asia, around, and getting a lot of control over the economies that they're working in. Now, a lot of these countries push back. You know, they don't like it that much. But it's a real challenge for them. How much can they resist, and how much can they not resist? I say this in part because, I mentioned this in part because when I was over there in China, one of the most important matters across my desk, I thought the most important geostrategic matter to cross my desk was something called Trans-Pacific Partnership, otherwise known as TPP. Essentially, that was the United States and 12 other countries, primarily Asian, Canada, Mexico were part of it, putting together a trade agreement to raise standards of trade, higher environmental standards, higher labor standards, higher intellectual property standards, something called data localization standards, just raise the standards of trade. And countries there, ambassador from Vietnam once said to me, says, Max, you gotta pass this thing. Why? Because we need you here. We need you Americans here in Asia. We play you off against China. And if you leave, or it looks like you're leaving, it's much harder for us to play you off against China. China, therefore, has more pressure, can exert more pressure on us. So our failure to pass that, my judgment, left a void. And when there's a void, somebody's going to fill it. China. And they have all these different agreements. I won't give all the names. There are just tons of them. And that's kind of slowly but surely, perceptibly moving down that road. Okay. I just have this up because one of the major efforts they're working, investing in is not just Central Asia and East Asian countries and India, but it's also Africa. I think they're yellow colors there are the only countries where China does not have investment. Okay. It's the same slide. I mean, same subject. It's interesting, while China's moving in Africa and Asia, this shows that in the last half year, China's investment in the United States has dropped off precipitously. Much less going to other countries. Europe went up just a little bit, 4%. North America down 92%. So why, you ask? What's going on here? I think a couple of things. Essentially, a lot of earlier Chinese investment in the United States was kind of flaky. They're losing money. And the Chinese government is asking big Chinese companies that invested in the United States to back off, come back. We're getting overextended, and you're embarrassing us. And we don't want you to do that. And they're backing off. They're investing elsewhere, not in the United States. This is defense spending. And essentially, different people have different estimates. Red's China, obviously, and the United States is the blues. So depending upon your belief and your estimates, the reds start to overtake the blues. China start to spend more on defense than we. 2030, 2040, is there somewhere. They're spending a lot on defense, not nearly as much as we are today, but more on a proportionate basis, an absolute basis, each year. You may have heard about the South China Sea, the islands being built in the South China Sea. This is a map, basically, that shows the contest. The red dashes there are called the nine-dash line. You count them, they're 9 dashes. What's the 9-dash line? China says anything within the 9-dash line, that's ours. Other countries have their claims too. You see, Malaysia does, Philippines does, North Vietnam does. Those blue lines are claims that those other adjacent countries have. China says, I don't care what you say, it's ours. I'm not exaggerating. I've had a lot of conversations. Listen, Mel is thinking of one right now. We went down, it was a Hainan, that's down in southern China. He had a whole museum all dedicated to justifying why it's all theirs. You talk to the top guy there and you try to engage him in a conversation. You can't get anywhere with him. I mean, this is just, it's theirs. You know, it's really bad. We watched China build those islands. As you probably recall, those are not islands. Those are submerged reefs, underwater reefs. What did China do? China dumped a lot of sand on those submerged reefs and turned them into islands. Then built military installations on those islands. They're not islands. And there's something called the United Nations Law of the Sea, which ruled China had, not Chinese, China has no claim, unanimously. China paid no attention to it. Okay. Fine, you can say it's a thing. It's ours. We're going to take them. And that's what they're doing. I'm sorry about this chart. You can't read it. Essentially, it's called, it's up there for illustrative purposes. You may have read about this thing called China 2025. Made in China 2025. Essentially, it's China's plan by the year 2025 later to be dominant in certain high-tech areas. Robotics, smart manufacturing, cloud computing, quantum computing. They've passed the cement stage. They've passed the steel construction stage. And now they're going on to the future stage. And that's what this chart's supposed to show. Okay. Now, I put this up because this is more timely, topical, it's current. You know, the blue is tariffs the United States has put on Chinese goods. China said, okay, we'll put the same tariffs on your goods that you import over to our country. That's what's happening there. Now, September 6th is kind of a big day because that's the day after which Donald Trump, if he wants to, will enact another $200 billion of tariffs on Chinese goods. And if that happens, China's going to retaliate. China is a big country. We're a big country. You cannot bully China. China can't bully us. And we've got two bullies right now looking at each other. And something's going to have to give here pretty quickly. I wish Mike were here. Mike might have an idea what to do about all this, but that's part of it. I also show this slide because I went over to China. I'll be brief as I can here. I met with Henry Kissinger for 15, 20 minutes to get some ideas. He didn't say much. We wrote a book called On China. It's a great book. Essentially, there's two main points. One is the Chinese play, in America and Western countries, we play chess. And in chess, they're absolute winners or losers. In chess, you win or you lose. unless it's a stalemate. There's no nuance here. In China, the game is not chess, it's Weiqi, or Go, it's called. It's like Chinese checkers. It's like Sun Tzu, the art of war. You put your players all around, it's a longer game, it takes longer. But after a while, you got your players positioned so the outcome is inevitable. You don't have to fight the fight. You know who's going to win, who's going to lose. That's what the Chinese do. That was South China Sea. Slowly, salami slicing. A little bit here, slowly, we'll put a little on this island. America's not going to send the Marines over. We put a little bit of sand on an island. Then another little island. It's like the frog in the boiling pot. Pretty soon the game's over. And it's a tactic. They're good at it, and that's what they did. They've done it in many ways. They're doing that with lots of ways. Another main point in the Kissinger book is this. He talks about the so-called Thucydides trap. There was a Greek historian named Thucydides, and he'd write about in history when a rising power meets an established power. Athens, Sparta, an example. And in world history, when a rising meets established, it usually doesn't turn out too well. Sometimes, but not too well. The most compelling part of the book for me on that point was this. Kissinger mentions how in 1907, the British Foreign Service tasked a fellow named Crow to write an analysis of Germany. They said to Mr. Crow, you tell us, British Foreign Service, what's the future of Germany in Europe? What's going to happen? So Crow did a little study, came back and said, pretty simple. It matters not one whit what Germany says. Germany considered the most peace-loving, wonderful, cooperative country in Europe. It's irrelevant. What does matter, he said? Two things. One, the size of Germany. Germany's a big country. And second, it's a military power. Those two factors alone will determine Germany's fate and European fate. Just those two factors alone. So Kissinger asked the same question about China. Rising power, United States established power. What's going to happen? He does not answer the question. It's a question I asked constantly when I was over there of the leadership, anybody I talked to, including Xi Jinping. My point was, look, your GDP is doubling every 10 years. Your military spending is doubling every 7 years. Look at the trend line. What are we to think? And we don't care what you say. What depends is, what are you doing? And what you're doing isn't too good. You're building all these islands in the South China Sea. Those are actions. They don't send good signals. You're protecting your country from U.S. competition, companies' competition doing business in China. That's not a very good thing. But I think it's an essential question that must be asked in this relationship. They would never answer the question. They'd sit there and they'd listen politely, take it all in. And it got to the point I asked so frequently that at a meeting, I've forgotten who was there with President Xi, and he raised it and said, oh, there's no Thucydides trap. I know it because I've been mentioned it so many times. And I don't agree with him. We don't know if there's a trap or not. It just depends on what we do, what China does, and how we take care of this. President Obama said the same thing. There's no trap in meeting with Xi. And again, I disagreed. We don't know. There may or may not be. We just don't know. And I think that's what we have to focus on. Mike Mansfield used to always say, many times, the most important bilateral relationship in the world is the U.S.-Japan relationship. That's when he's a big Japanese expert, an ambassador to Japan. If he were alive today, I'll bet you dollars to donuts he'd say the most important is U.S.-China, because China's so big, it's so effective. I mean, it's so impactful on the United States. And that's where we are. We're also facing a time where the two leaders are pretty stubborn, Xi and Trump. I don't think Trump understands China at all. Xi understands the United States very well. And this trade standoff, I think it's going to continue for some time. I so hope that Trump does not pull the trigger on the next $200 billion, because if he does, boy, it's going to be extremely difficult all the way around. And once that happens, it's so hard to put the genie back in the bottle. It's hard to back off once you take significant steps like that. So that's where we are. I'm going to finish up Mike Mansfield, because Mike's my man. He's our man. And the spirit of Mike, I think, is something I believe in, and I'm going to keep working with the best I can. I'm staying involved in U.S.-China Matters because I care about it so much. I love the job over there. It was so rewarding. Two reasons: that the people, they're energetic, they're pragmatic, practical, want to get things done, live in the future. I think even more upbeat about their future than we Americans are about ours, basically. Second, the reward of working on this relationship, U.S.-China. It is so important. And so what I was doing over there, as best I could, marginally, starting at the top all the way down to the cab drivers, just to keep talking, just constructively. And I was over there too, I thought it's very good if I did something else. After a month, 2 or 3 months there, was very candid with the person on the side of the table. I almost have to interrupt because they stand up there, sit there with their talking points. My crack staff would get my talking points. It's kind of stupid after 3 months. We're not talking to each other. And so I was very candid and developed a reputation over there as being straight talk, candid, constructively, not an ounce of condescension. We're in this together, U.S., China, and we got to figure this out. And I'll say this in a bright spot. China does not want a trade war. They do not want a trade war. We are joined together at the hip, U.S. and China, in many, many ways, economically. They help us in the UN with Iran, North Korea, lots of other areas. Sure, they're expansionist. And if we get in the Q&A, I could give some examples of what we could do to help deal with some of that. But the party, wants to maintain their legitimacy, control. They do that by keeping the people happy. That's the Faustian bargain. As long as the people are happy, then they don't question the government legitimacy. What keeps the people happy? Rising incomes. Address air and water pollution, health care, education. Keep the people happy. And the people will be much less likely to be happy if there's a big trade war. And he'll stay in charge. It's authoritarian government. It's very repressive. But he still wants to keep people happy and avoid a trade war if he possibly can. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be with you. By the way, this is Mel, my wife Mel. I'm so proud of her for a lot of reasons, and she's a great storyteller. All our experiences in China, and one that's sort of paramount is if she were to tell us is how, when we were over in China, the U.S. government gave me a car, and a driver. They did not give Mel a car or a driver.
He couldn't even send his car to pick me up at the airport. The government said no dice.
So we got a car, and Mel got a driver's license. And she drove herself, by herself, all the way around Beijing. And if you know anything about Beijing traffic, it's an adventure. So we had lots of adventures.
I survived. Here, why don't you start with that?
Okay. Okay. Please restate the context of the Mansfield article in '68 about China so we'll know how to find it. Okay. The Mansfield Foundation has published the article in a little brochure. It's kind of green on the top. It's the same. The cover looks just like that. And it's March 1968. First lecture given by the Mansfield Foundation by Mike, 1968. It is terrific. And he wrote it because he felt, as an Asian history professor at the university, all that he knew and all he has studied this so much as an Asian expert, that this is the right thing to do. Don't forget, he served in China when he was in the military, a PFC. He knew China. Amazing man, Mike.
I'm just going to give you a stack.
Okay.
I'm kind of triaging what you haven't addressed yet.
Okay. I was just thinking of Mike apropos of totally nothing. We're driving up, I was reading some stuff. He said some quotes. And he said he had to get too involved in participating in national security committees, intelligence committee and all that. Why? It's because anything that comes out of those committees is already reported earlier in the New York Times. I found that to be the case too when I was in Congress. You don't have to go to these committees. It's all in the New York Times. The Washington Post, it's in the papers. Most of it, not the real secret stuff, most of it.
Do you want me to read those to you?
Okay.
Okay. Here. All right. I'll just read this one. Okay. Going forward, what should our posture be with China? It seems as if the tariff war is really negative, not only for China, but the rest of the world as well.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think Donald Trump and a lot of the American business community is right when they say China's just not playing fair. China certainly has a right to develop its country, like all countries have a right to develop their own countries. The difference is this. We Americans want to play by Judeo-Christian ethic precepts of fairness. It's in our Constitution. It's in our Bill of Rights. We have an independent judiciary. It's transparency, free speech. That's the American Western way. We assume that everybody else should have the same precepts, and if they don't, they should. Not so. Or another way of saying the same thing. We Westerners believe in process, in fairness. A lot of Asian cultures, including China, not process, fairness, results. It's irrespective of the process, basically. That's a bit of an overstatement, but I think there's a lot of truth in it. So Trump is right when he and other people say, and I chime in, that China is not being, quote, fair. Contracts are not really enforceable in China very well. Courts, there's no really rule of law. Not much of an independent judiciary. They say there is, but it's very selectively enforced. So China's just not playing fair. So we have a choice. Do we do something about it or not? Most Americans want to do something about it, and should, because China is such a huge market. American companies say, well, they may not be fair with me, my company, but this is China. It's a huge market. I got to be here. I got to be a player, and I'll put up with it. What are some of the areas where China's not fair? There are really a couple, three. At least those are on the surface. One is intellectual property theft. It's true. A lot of intellectual property is stolen. There's no question about that in many ways. It's better. The intellectual property courts are a little better. But the other is something called forced technology transfer. As your company want to do business in China, China says, okay, well, you want to do business with us, so you got to set up a joint venture here, and you can only own about less than 50% of the joint venture, and you got to transfer your technology over to me. I'm the Chinese company. If you want to do business here, and the government enforces that, which really creates a big business decision for the American company. Do you do this or do you not do it? And the hammer that China has is the size of the market. And if you don't, then other countries will, your competitors will, and that's part of the problem. There's another problem, there's other things. So what do we do about it? President Trump thinks you get China's attention to make these changes by imposing these tariffs on Chinese imports in the United States. That is essentially a tax on Americans. The it's a tariff on products coming to the United States. That's a tax. And China's going to retaliate and do the same thing as that one chart shows. And it's totally inefficient. It will not force China to back off on these areas I mentioned, because those areas are neuralgic to China. This is their future. I'm talking about 2025. New advanced technologies, which is what Trump wants China to change. Wants to try and change China. And they're not going to do it. And so we're going to be in this huge battle. You might ask, okay, what do we do? My judgment, the answer is you got to work with other countries. Right now, President Trump is offending our allies. He's not working with our allies. You know, this is big time stuff. You got to be smart about this, and you got to swallow some pride to be effective. And I think if we were to work with China, work with Europe and so forth, it'd work. I'll give you one little example of this, and I'll try to be as quick as possible. About a year after I arrived, China came up with something called the banking guidelines. What are they? Basically, it said, okay, all Chinese banks in China, after a couple of years, all the content you purchase, routers, servers, all electrical stuff you purchase for the bank, 70% of it had to be Chinese companies. In addition, there's something called data localization. All the data had to be localized in China. You had to have a back door so the government could look to see what's going on. Source code had to all be transferred and turned over. That's anathema to American companies. They can't do that. I remember talking to Tim Cook. This is Tim. Tim's at Max. If they do that, I got to rethink my strategy in China. I'm going to have to pull back from China if that happens. The long and short is we raised the dickens with the Chinese over all this, and I especially got exercised over it. Well, what really worked is this. We got the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to write a really tough letter against the Chinese, as did the U.S.-China Business Council, as did the European Union Chamber of Commerce, as did the European Commission, as did Cadendron, that's the Japanese Business Association, as did South Korea. So China was getting it from all sides. China could not divide and conquer. All countries are saying, no way. It's the only time I've seen China back off on anything significant, because we stuck together, the United States with our friends. I think there's a real lesson there. That's something we have to do in the future to deal with the legitimate questions that President Trump is trying to address.
There's a two-part question. I think you've answered the first.
Microphone. Can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me? No?
Take mine.
Test. Oh, yikes. I have a pretty loud voice anyway. Okay, two-part question, and I think you've answered the first part. What is the current rationale behind the U.S. trade policy, and do you agree with it? And I think we've heard your opinion. But the second part is really, I think you haven't addressed yet. How serious is China's intellectual theft?
I think it's pretty serious. You know, it's one of the hardest things for me, is keep an open, objective mind about all this stuff. You know, after a while, it's pretty easy to be cynical and skeptical. You got to fight it. You got to fight it. You got to look at the facts and try to be objective and see what's really happening. We caught China red-handed stealing. Well, you might remember it was what was it? That big, anyway, agency, a federal agency. Lots of data was stolen. Tons of data was stolen, and we sanctioned them. Oh, they got all bent out of shape. The number 2 guy, and I met with him, and he said, well, Max, or Master Baucus, what do we do? I said, I'll tell you what you do. You stop it. And then you also tell us what you've done to apprehend the perpetrators, and the framework you're setting in mind so it's not going to happen again. We got so exercised, they sent their top guy over, and we, United States, it's a 5-point agreement. Okay, addressing intellectual property theft. This is cyber theft, and it's okay. It's not great. It helps. It's a step forward, and it's a problem. I mentioned IP courts are a little better. Most of the cases brought in IP courts, intellectual property courts in China, are by Chinese companies against Chinese. And like 80 to 90% are by Chinese companies against other Chinese companies. We Americans win more cases than we lose in these courts. IP courts are the brighter spot in the country. There's such surveillance there. Our residence was totally surveilled.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Before I went over, Mel and I sat down with former Ambassador John Huntsman, get some pointers and this and that. He's a great guy. And I can tell the story.
Yeah, you can tell it.
Anyway, we're talking, and Mary Kay, John's wife, you know, this residence, there are cameras, there are microphones everywhere.
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 And Mary Kay said, well, I think there's one place they can't see me. And that's why I'm in the bathtub, because there's no vent above the bathtub. To which Mel immediately said, oh my God, I gotta lose 10 pounds. No, I mean, there's really no place totally safe. My residence, I had an office in the residence. It's supposed to be secure. It wasn't. The only place that's really secure, I have to go to the embassy. We have a very nice embassy, we Americans do, in Beijing. And I counted the number of doors once I had to go through to get to the safe spot. 13 doors. And it's like, you think you're in a cell. You are in a cell. But that's the only place where I know there's secure, I think there's secure communications between the United States and the embassy and so forth. But other than that, you got to assume that everything is surveilled.
When we were at home, and if we needed to have a private conversation without anybody listening, we'd have to leave all of our devices at home, and there was a park about a block away. I mean, you didn't even wear a belt buckle. You just went and stood under a tree and had a conversation.
But we had a good time too. On occasion, we'd be sitting there, there's two of us having dinner together. We cheer each other, and I say to Mel, gee, aren't the Chinese wonderful people?
I love this place.
Isn't Xi Jinping a great leader? Gosh, isn't he wonderful?
These Chinese leaders really know
They know what they're doing. It was fun.
Okay, last tariff question. How do we resolve this tariff problem, especially in terms of ag products like soybeans? Are we simply going to lose these markets to other producers? How do we fix it?
Well, if we continue, we're going to lose markets. China's buying soybeans from Brazil, Argentina. China is got this big new plan. They're going to plant 1 million acres more in soybeans in northeast China, subsidized. Essentially, I think China wants to be as self-sufficient as it can in lots of different areas. Not just agriculture, but it's also technology and so forth, so they're less reliant on other countries. Now, to some degree, they think they can do that because they're so big, but of course, you can't totally. You got to import a lot of stuff. That's the way it is. So what's the answer? Well, whoosh. Essentially, I hope President Trump does not decide on the next 200. He's even suggested he might raise the tariff from 10% to 25%. That'd be catastrophic. Because China will retaliate. They're not going to take a sit down. So we should try to do what we can to discourage this from happening, but he's kind of unpredictable. It's hard to know what he's going to do. It gets to elections, frankly. It's kind of corny. But, you know, the United States, you know, you're in charge. You're the employers. When I was in the Senate, I always say, and I meant it, back then our population was a little bit lower than it is today, I'd say I have 900,000 of the world's best bosses. I'm just a hired hand. I'm just the employee here.
Jane Karas doesn't think we're smart enough to ask a question.
censoring people. We're just asking the questions because.
Okay, well, I'll try.
Well, there's a whole
I'll give a really short answer.
Yeah,
Anyway,
we're going through 'em.
anyway,
Yeah.
okay. I'm just urging you. I mean, you got to stand up sometimes, and call up your vote for the people you think are best, and then do something about it once they get elected. I saw a United States senator from Montana turned around on an issue because of all the calls he got from home a few years ago. It does make a difference. And look at this. Each of you is 35, 36 times more powerful than a California citizen. Think of it. You have 35 times the access to a United States senator compared to the Californian. You've got a lot of power. And if you use it, it does make a difference. And I have found telephone calls make a big, big difference. Just call up. Hi, this is Steve Smith from Kalispell. I want to talk to Steve Daines. Well, he's not here right now. He's busy, but I'll take a message. I appreciate it. Here's my telephone number. If you call me back, I'd really appreciate it. You wait about a week. There's no call back. And so could be a tester's office too. I'm not being picking here. So he called back again. Well, I called and didn't hear back. I'm one of his bosses, one of his employers. I kind of like talk to him. And after about the third or fourth call, guess what? You're going to get a telephone call. And it's going to work. And then, obviously, you speak your piece. You'll be respectful about it. Say what you think. And you say, I'll be watching. See what you're doing respectfully. And I'll tell you, it'll make a huge difference. I see Bob Brown, he's in the audience here, a very good friend of mine in the state legislature, and I suspect Bob will agree with what I'm saying. I don't know. And Sue, but it just, you are in charge. You are in charge.
Okay.
All it takes is a phone call. It's not a lot of effort. Get that phone up to your ear.
Okay, there's lots of questions. We can't get to them all. I pulled out what I think
I'll be real quick.
I pulled out what I think are the toughest questions.
Okay.
So before we get to civility and politics, immigration, and guns, let's go to this question. Voter turnout was about 55% in the last election for president. Some elections are lower in turnout. Is this good for America? What should be done?
Well, it's obviously bad. It's not good. In Australia, it's against the law not to vote. Guess what? Turnout in Australia is pretty good. I mean, it's like 97%, something like that. And if you don't vote, somebody comes and knocks on your doors. That's no big deal. But it's the law to vote. You got to vote. I think it's not a bad idea that we should be voting. And we have a citizen's obligation to vote. That's one thing can be done about it. But that's like the Pogo cartoon. He met the enemy and he is us. Nobody's going to do this for us. And if we care, we got to do it ourselves. Just the way it is. That's life. And it's not good. Maybe, this could be some people think this might be a wave year. Many more women might vote this year, possibly. And it's just people are starting to get a little bit anxious, a little riled up. It's not, things might change. I tend to think, I'd be dead wrong. Donald Trump is starting to get a lot of people upset with the presidency, with him, and people are getting concerned. I think there's a huge reservoir of decency in our country. And we're going to, you can see where I'm coming from, we're going to survive this. But we're more likely to survive it the more we do something about it. That means get involved.
Great segue into this question. Is there any way to bring back civility to politics?
You know, I've been asked this question often. I ask myself the question often, trying to find an honest answer, not something glib, you know, some throwaway. It's hard. I think, as I alluded earlier, part of it's all the money today, politics. That's part of it. The media doesn't help. They just like talk about the bad stuff and get people all riled up. It doesn't help, but it is what it is, First Amendment. This may be easier for me to say because I'm not there, but I believe it. I think the current members of Congress, especially Republicans, who know better, should stand up and start doing something about all of this nonsense. Now, why don't they? I say essentially Republicans because we have a Republican president. If you're a Democrat, I'd say it should be Democrats. But Republicans don't so far because they're worried, quote, about the Trump base. They're worried that that 35, 40% who support Donald Trump are going to react very negatively if they say something adverse to what President Trump's doing or they try to reform what President Trump's doing or whatnot. They're afraid. They're afraid. In life, the strongest human instinct is survival. That's true in spades in politics. And I was there. I'm partially guilty myself. We all want to survive. We all want to get reelected. So a lot of those men and women, Republicans, who know better, privately, they tell me that. When Mel and I were back there just a few days ago, we talked to a few Republican senators and said, oh, Max, gosh, this is terrible what's going on here, and so forth. But they don't because they're afraid. They're afraid of the Trump base. My view is, I could be dead wrong because I'm not there, look at these men and women, they're not dumb. They're smart. That's how they got elected. And they know their home states and their home districts pretty well. And if they stood up and went back home and explained what they're doing, and you have to be home a lot. You've got to be home certainly every weekend. You've got to talk to an awful lot of people over and over and over again. And with a true message where your integrity comes through and your belief in our country comes through, I believe that they'd be surprised at how well they do. I believe that strongly. But it's, so that's a partial answer to that question.
Ready?
Yep.
Is there any common ground to solving the immigration problem?
Oh, God. I don't
Hopefully
know.
I got you the hard ones.
I don't know. You know, it's so hard. We've been working on immigration reform our country for 20, 30 years. And each group it stands up and wants its part solved. Let's take farm laborers, countries in California, farm labor. They want a lot more immigrants coming in as farm workers. High-tech companies, they want more H-1B visas so their high-tech workers can come in. A lot of people say, oh no, we got too many illegals coming in. And they say, well, what are we going to do about the 10 to 12 million illegals here now? The answer is, well, they should have a pathway to citizenship. Well, what do you mean pathway to citizenship? They're here illegal. And it's, well, if they get educated and they pay their dues and vote and this and that, and they do pay income taxes, well, I don't know. That is one of the harder issues to solve.
Okay. I'll give you a choice. We've got time for one more. Guns or health care? How do you fix either problem?
Maybe they're the same thing. Oh my. Well, I just believe, well, I'll try to be very quick here. I'll start with health. You know, it's not right that we pay so much per person in health care in this country. We Americans pay about 20% per person in health care, about 20%. The next highest country pays about 7, 8%. on health, and their outcomes are no better. In fact, their outcomes are better than ours. Our mortality rate is higher, even though we pay so much more for health care. We got a crazy system in America. And we really don't have a system. So I decided, about 2006, 7, 8, 7, we needed to do something about all this. And spent 15 months, our committee, the Senate Finance Committee, dedicated solely to this question. It was wonderful. We had Republican senators, Democratic senators, trying to learn what's our health system all about. Nobody knew. What's Medicare really? How do doctors get compensated? Insurance companies, what's their role? Medical equipment providers, how do they get compensated? Hospital, all this, nobody knew. And so we sat down and burrowed down on each of those subjects. It worked because nobody knew. That means there's a mutual search for the truth. We were both trying to figure it all out. It wasn't partisan. We just didn't know what it was. And it was wonderful. And we got better. And the major point was to make sure more people had health insurance and increase coverage. It's Medicare, Medicaid, and private exchanges, et cetera. Then try to deal with rising costs. That's kind of hard. Try to change it so doctors are compensated more on the basis of outcomes, not number of procedures they perform, things like that. Unfortunately, got to the point and where for me to get this passed, I put together a group of 6, the core 6 people in the Senate Finance Committee. 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. I was the chairman. And we just kept working and working. I could feel after a while, one by one, the Republicans start to fall off. They did not want to stay at the table. And then none of them stayed at the table. And my judgment is because the other side saw a huge political, not substantive, huge political opportunity to beat Democrats. And they named it Obamacare. And that was a political opportunity. I don't know who all orchestrated it. Mitch McConnell, I'm sure, had something to do with it. But it was just, that's what happened. And it just became very political ever since. I showed you that slide up there, John McCain voting against repeal. That took a lot of courage because it's so partisan, healthcare in America today. Guns, that's another issue. I think it depends on the state. We can't solve that. Montana's not New York. And unfortunately, we're one country. So I have not given a lot of thought to that, frankly. I'm more involved in healthcare in China than in guns.
I'm more exercised about that.
Do you have a question?
Do I have?
No, she does. She wants to ask a question.
No, I was just speaking for everybody else.
Oh.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we answered most.
Well, go ahead.
What do you think happened to our relationship with China when we decided to go into this last Iraqi war? I think we lost our focus on China and trade and gave them a 30-year leg up. What do you think?
Well, this is in retrospect. The war in Iraq was wrong. We lost so many. I lost a nephew in Iraq. We did not know what we were doing. There's no follow-up. It's the old thing, you go in, how do you get out? We didn't spend much attention thinking about that. With respect to China, I don't know. China is starting to make more inroads now in not only Iraq, but especially Afghanistan. That's another Mike Mansfield story, which meant a lot to me. We all love Mike. When he was at the hospital dying, Mike, Walter Reed, I'll back up. I went to see him once. He's so smart. He's so tough, Mike Mansfield. He got his appendix taken out, and he got another operation, 2 at the same time at Walter Reed Hospital. And I was in to see him and talk to him. Then I talked to the doctor afterwards and says, gosh, he looks so good. He must exercise. God, he looks good. And the doctor said, I thought the same thing. I asked him that question. He's never exercised in his life. And then at the last time when he was dying, it was a big lesson for me. I went to see him, we talked. It's really, it's Mike. And about various things. You know, Mike, one of the speeches, one of my favorite speeches always to give is, it's called Montana is a Symphony. I'm sure a lot of you heard it. And it talks about Montana is a symphony. He talks about all the colors and Montana rivers and mountains, like Ruby and Yellowstone, Blackfoot. He goes on and on. It's a symphony. I said, Mike, that's just a great speech. He says, yep. That was Maureen's idea. Then we talked a little more, and this is 2001. And he said, okay, Max, what's Congress going to do? Is Congress going to send troops into Afghanistan? This is after 9/11. So I think we are. His face just blanched. He gave me a 15-minute history lesson on Afghanistan, starting out with Alexander the Great. Conquered Afghanistan, couldn't hold it, had to leave. Genghis Khan, conquered, couldn't hold it, had to leave. Soviet Union came in, couldn't hold it, had to leave. And when you visit Afghanistan, boy, you can tell why that is the case. It is such a desolate, tribal, non-institutional, vast space. And boy, whenever any issue come up with the Middle East, especially Iraq, Afghanistan, I always remember that. In fact, just after I saw Mike, Democrats were all at lunch and we're talking about issues, and I stood up and I said, do we know what we're doing over there in Afghanistan? Man, they thought they wrote me off. They thought I was the stupidest guy around. They thought they knew what they were doing. The military was in there talking. So anyway, I guess I could have been tougher about it, but anyway.
They didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah. Pastime. Okay, I'll be real quick. One more, quick one. Yeah.
Oh, with the deficit talks have helped pass a tax bill which increases the deficit. So if they want to decrease the deficit, what are they going to do?
Nothing.
Cut Medicare.
They're going to try to cut Medicare, Medicaid. Now, they're not going to get anywhere. It's not going to work. But that's what they talk about. Or Social Security.
May I ask a question? Why are we supporting the Israeli government, not the Jewish people and not the Palestinian people, but the Israeli government to keep the Palestinians down, to have a wall up for Gaza? And when the Gaza people are non-violently protesting, they're being shot. Why are we paying for that, our money?
Jared Kushner, Donald Trump, and Bibi Netanyahu.